So the role of a curator at a museum is to, are you actively looking for exhibits? Are you receiving proposals for exhibits? Are you, if somebody has a body of work, are you selecting parts of it that you feel are representative or achieve your goals as an institution? What exactly does that involve?
Yeah, so it's a little of all of the above. So we are, and I think it's really institutionally based. So our museum in particular is kind of a amalgamation of a lot of things. We have been an institution for over 100 years, and in that time we've had a lot of identities. So that includes being a science museum, a children's museum, a curio cabinet, and in that time we've kind of had a lot of identities that have tied into what our institution is now today. So for our institution in particular, we are focused on both supporting our permanent collection that has been built over the course of over 100 years, as well as bringing in rotating exhibitions. And those exhibitions are based, just like you said, off of artist proposals that are sent to us, which is not as often as we don't select from those as often as we do from intentionally going out and finding exhibitions that fit the museum best. So
Uh,
I guess really, when I think about how we choose exhibitions, we do it based off of kind of a system that most museums use. So the foundation of those exhibits that we choose are based off of how does this fit our museum mission? How does it fit within our strategic initiatives that have been built into the institutional strategic plan? And how does this exhibition serve our stakeholders? So when we are looking at all of those proposals or all of those ideas that we as curators at the museum have, we have to think first and foremost, does it fit into these foundational categories that we have to kind of check all of those boxes?
got it. Okay, so the foundational categories, I guess, would be, are you including all of those: mission, strategic plan, and stakeholders in all of
Yes.
those?
Yeah.
And when you say, like, how does, when you're thinking, how does an exhibition fit with your stakeholders? Who are those stakeholders, and what does it mean to fit within that? Or is this like a board that has certain expectations?
Yeah, so it's everything from our visitors, our museum members that have really invested in our institution, to donors who provide financial giving to support exhibitions and the museum, all the way up to our board. So our general stakeholders that we consider are everything from the one-time visitor all the way up to our board members.
Mm,
So it's kind of a broad pool, but if you're not serving one of those categories, then it just doesn't function properly. And really, first and foremost, we keep visitors and members at the top of that list. And donors and board members are considered in that pool because they are the I guess they are the soul of the operation. They keep the institution on track to meet those strategic initiatives, and they come
mm,
back and they say, okay, this exhibition does not fit where we want to be in 5 years, or this exhibition is
mm.
not serving what we want to be doing and what we see for the future of the museum. So our exhibitions really do have to, like I said, check those foundational boxes to make sure that we are doing all of those things. We are serving the museum mission. We are serving to be a space that serves our community, I guess is the
Got it.
easiest way to describe it.
Got it. And the community there, it does include one-time visitors, members of the museum, donors, board members, all of those people.
Exactly. So it's
Got it.
everything
Got it.
from
Okay.
our school groups that come all the way up to people who have been members at the museum for 30, 40, 50 years. So it
Hmm.
really is a
Hmm.
diverse pool that we're pulling from to make sure these exhibitions are serving that entire community.
Right. You said earlier that while you do take proposals from artists, the more often you are intentionally seeking out exhibitions to bring into the museum, what does that process look like? Is that a lot of travel on site to see what other people are doing? Is it looking at digital representations of those exhibitions? What does that mean?
We look a little bit at digital content online. So I do a lot of online research, looking at different artist websites to see if what they're doing makes sense for us as an institution. I attend a lot of art fairs. I go to a lot of artist studios. I try and keep a pace with what's going on in the art world. And because we are located in New Jersey, you know, what's happening in New York, what's happening in New Jersey, like there's so much going on in the art community in both places. So I'm really fortunate that I'm able to keep a pace of, you know, what is happening right now? How can we as an institution really tap into that energy, and how do we choose exhibitions intentionally from this entire pool that makes sense for us as an institution and will also really be dynamic and exciting and engaging. So I focus primarily on art. That's my
Okay.
realm. We at the museum, we have a Guinness curator who focuses on our Guinness collection, and then myself, who focuses primarily on art exhibitions. So my entire universe is revolving around art, and it's kind of from all time periods. So I'm a generalist. Our museum doesn't just focus on one time period of art, but we do a lot of contemporary living artists. That's my
Okay.
personal favorite, is contemporary living artists.
You mentioned a Guinness curator. Now, is this, I'm a layperson, is this like Guinness as in Guinness Book of World Records?
Yeah,
Is this
so
related? Okay.
the Guinness collection is kind of one of those things our museum is most known for. It is the Murtaugh Guinness collection of musical mechanical instruments and automata, which is such a tongue tie.
Okay.
Yeah.
I
So,
remember
but
reading about the
he is,
automata. Okay, great,
yeah, so
cool.
he is from the Guinness brewing family, Guinness Book of World Records.
Okay.
That is this man. And he spent his entire life collecting over 750 of these, which the museum now has. And 150 of those are always on view. So we do a lot of exhibition programming around this collection that really supports what modern artists are doing with automata and kinetic art, or kind of new ways to look at this collection. It's really diverse and interesting. So we have a curator just dedicated to that collection and how to kind of pull that collection into the present and the future.
You know, I feel very silly not knowing that the Guinness family does both the beer and the world records. I learned something new today. I feel like I should have known that at some point. That's pretty interesting. Well, what an interesting family then to be interested in. I mean, if they're interested in things, you mentioned musical artifacts,
Yeah.
um, musical artifacts and automata. I mean, uh, that's a bit quirky, and I can imagine how somebody who's interested in that would also be interested in sort of like the limits of human experience and achievement and exceptionalism in that way. And so, of course, like how many hot dogs can you fit in? I mean, who right? How many hot dogs can you eat in an hour? I don't know if that's it actually in the Book of World Records, but yeah, that's such an interesting. What interesting people. Um, so you focus primarily on art.
Yeah.
Now the definition of that, I assume, extends from it. Is it physical and digital art?
Yeah, so we have done exhibitions of both, um, and a confluence of both in some of
Okay.
our exhibitions. You know, technologies are advancing so quickly, and the art world is not one to shy away from new innovations. And so we're finding more and more that artists are learning to adapt these technologies in really interesting and unexpected ways. There is a piece that was up at the Museum of Modern Art called Unsupervised, where the artist had a computer survey over 200 pieces of work from the Museum of Modern Art. and then interpret that data. An AI engine interpreted that data, and it's the machine dreaming about all of these 200 works of art and all of that data combined. And it's this amazing,
Whoa.
like immersive digital painting, for lack of a better word, that's
Hmm.
constantly morphing into something new based on what this machine is dreaming. Um,
And it's doing that live, and
yes.
it isn't like pre-recorded. Okay.
No, so you're watching it as
Wow.
it unfolds, and it's always wildly different. And then at our museum in the past year, we had a exhibition of an artist called Federico Solmi, and he uses video game engines to create these really immersive digital paintings. So he
Hmm.
hand paints everything, has it uploaded into a video game engine and wrapped around, like his models are wrapped around a wireframe. And then
Okay.
he programs it to be this experiential digital painting. And then on the outside of it, so it's displayed on a TV screen, and then
Hmm.
on the outside, he creates a frame that he then hand paints on. It's very encaustic and textural and immersive. And so he's really combining those traditional artistry techniques with modern technologies. And then he pushed it a step further to create a virtual reality experience where you, as the
Hmm.
visitor, are inside of his painting. And so you sit down, you put on a VR mask, and then you become a character inside of this world that he's created. And it's
Ah.
amazing to me how artists are adopting these technologies and really using them to push their own practices forward.
Hmm. In that case, does the visitor, besides the VR version, I'm thinking of the version that is displayed on the TV screen. Is that a pre-scripted set of actions or animations that are happening, or is there some control that the visitor has over what happens?
No, so the digital one it's almost plays out like a play. So it's
Okay.
set on a loop so that you can sit and experience the entire act from start to
Hmm.
finish, and then it will loop around and start again so that the visitor can really sit down and almost watch it like live theater. But
Right.
the VR experience, you are interacting with the space. You are an active part of it, and it is playing out similarly to what you're seeing on the two-dimensional flat screen, but you are an active participant in it in the VR experience.
There seems like such an interesting logical next step where you can start to incorporate um, dialogue trees or AI to have novel situations and novel visuals and interactions arise given parameters that the artist sets, right? Have you
Yeah.
seen examples of that start to emerge?
No, I even if I had, I wouldn't know. I am not a computer
Hmm.
tech person. So just figuring out how these artists are adopting these technologies is it confounds me. So
What
if
an
I was
interesting.
set to do it, it would not
Yeah,
happen.
no, obviously with what we do, making websites and working with content creators all the time, AI is something that's at the top of everybody's mind right now, and
Right.
I don't know how closely you follow that news, but there was an executive order just issued this morning from the Biden-Harris administration about like um, guidelines that they want to enforce within the United States and its partners on how AI is used, and it's pretty broad-reaching, and it touches on things like bias and diversity and representation, as well as cryptography and all of these really sort of technical, scary implications. But it'll be interesting to see how now with this generative art and experience that there might also be a regulatory aspect to it as well. That like how now will sort of government regulations interact with art in this specific space
Yeah.
outside of the boundaries of our conversation, perhaps, but it's something that kind of I was thinking about this morning as I was reading through this executive order that was issued. Um, I'm curious, thinking about some of the museum experiences I've had. And I'll admit that I lean very heavily into modern and contemporary art. That's just kind of the stuff that really kind of interests me. Um, but also this idea of like curios and curio cabinets and things like that. You mentioned that that is one aspect of the museum, and I think where it began, right? It started originally as Morris Museum started as a curio cabinet.
Yes.
Um, what what was the experience of a curio cabinet then? What exactly is that? How has that evolved, and what shape does that take now when maybe most of us think of a museum and we think of spaces where things are hung or rooms that have curtains and are dark that then emerge into a differently lit space, and like how do those things start to interact with one another?
Yeah, so when I think of a curio cabinet, I think of kind of the German tradition of wonder cabinets, where it was something of the natural world, something. So a lot of natural history objects, plant specimens, animal specimens, taxidermy, that kind of thing, combined with what used to be ethnographic collections, cultural artifacts is the better term for it, um, of different communities and different peoples. So our institution really started out as a way to teach the Morristown community about other cultures and other people, and people that would travel would bring things back from their travels to teach the community about these other cultures and the history of the
Mm.
peoples and the history of different parts of the world. And then when we became a science museum, a science and art museum, and a children's museum at one point, we ended up with a really large collection of taxidermy native New Jersey birds and animals. And we have a lot of decorative arts, we have a lot in our permanent collection. It's really wide and diverse. We have a large rock and mineral collection, a large dinosaur collection. It's really kind of this amazing space. One of my favorite places in the museum is our museum storage, because it's so wildly diverse from, like I said, all of those identities. So we have everything from fine art hanging in the same art vault as like a wagon or a full-sized horse-drawn carriage in their sled.
It's
Is
kind of
in
like that
there.
warehouse at the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark where they just throw
Yeah,
open a
exactly.
box
That's
and
what
yeah,
it
yeah,
reminds me
yeah. You
of.
have no
It's
idea what you're going to run
amazing.
into.
But it really is kind of this amazing collection that we're able to pull from when we want to do permanent collection exhibitions, because it is so diverse. We just did one this past summer
Mm.
on beach going, because we live in New Jersey. Jersey Shore is super, like, it's such a cultural part of living in New Jersey, going down the shore for
Hmm.
the summer. So we did a whole exhibition based on the history of beach going, those souvenirs that you would collect, and because we also have a large textile collection that includes historic bathing suits. So it
Oh
really
wow.
is an amazing, diverse, permanent collection that we're able to pull from to kind of support everything else we're doing in the institution, including our rotating exhibitions. And we do have
I
some permanent galleries that include some of like the best of the best of our works of art that are in our painting collection. The most historic paintings in our collection are on view. And we have our rocks and mineral collection is on view. We have a dinosaur gallery. We have a Native American gallery. And yeah, so we have all of that is always on view, including
hmm
in addition to our Guinness gallery, which is always on view. So those are like our permanent collection spaces. And then on top of that, we have, it always changes, like 4 rotating galleries, 4 or 5
hmm
spaces that rotate depending on what's going on at the time with traveling exhibitions. Well, I mean,
I
rotating exhibitions, not so much traveling exhibitions, but
got it. as you mentioned, the German Cabinet of Curiosities, I started Googling it and looking, kind of reading into this in the background here.
Yeah.
Uh, Wonder rooms or Kunstkammer. These are. I think this is exactly what I kind of imagined when I thought
Yeah.
about what, because it does feel very. Let me get the century right here. Um, 16th, 17th century, that like, welcome to the Cabinet of Curiosities, right? These are the things
Yeah.
that I've sort of found around the world
These are my
and brought
collections from my
into.
travels.
Yes, exactly. There's some
Yeah.
some eccentric who has all kinds, like a narwhal horn, and then here's, this strange mechanical bird, and um that stuff is so fascinating. I imagine that with the diversity of some of the things that you're exhibiting at the Morris Museum, you have this one area of sort of uh, a modern take on this cabinet of curiosities, but then you have these digital exhibits that involve, entering a painting through VR. When you design the museum itself, and you have this piece of real estate, right? That can be divided, and some of it can be reconfigured, and some of it can't be really reconfigured. I imagine that one of the first things you probably do when organizing the space itself is that some of it is dedicated to things that are more permanent, and so you can be more permanent with how things are hung on the wall, or secured in space. And there's some things that need to be a bit more easily exchanged, because every few months you need to swap it all out and move some things around, and all of that. But I imagine you also probably divide the space into very distinct sections, where this wing of the museum is for maybe the curiosities, and this other wing of the museum is maybe for some of the rotating exhibits. Is thinking about the experience of a museum, because you wouldn't want all of this stuff to just be all mashed together, right? Like,
Yeah.
it might seem kind of random if you're like, here's a VR thing next to a bunch of geodes, right? It is that, in fact, kind of the first way that you start to think about how do you put these things into spaces that will make sense, and align and create an experience for people as they walk through it.
So this also kind of goes back to when we were talking about how we choose exhibitions. Part of how we choose exhibitions is looking at the holistic offerings of the museum at any given time. So there are spaces that don't change over. So our entire second floor is permanent collections. It doesn't ever change. We update it, and we do maintenance and all of those things that need to happen. But when it changes, whatever changes happen, they're going to be that way for a few years. So we can really invest in the time and the placement, and it's all very intentional in how we go about making changes to our permanent galleries. Everything we do is intentional, so that's probably not the best way to say that. But we, yeah, so those changes, like you said, are a little
Intentional in a
more permanent.
permanent way,
Yes,
and not, yeah.
exactly.
Yes.
So when we change those over, it is done in a very permanent way. But when we're looking at our rotating exhibitions, those are always in the same spaces in our museum. So we have our main gallery, which is this large open footprint with movable 14-foot walls, high walls. And then we have our mansion galleries, which are inside our historic mansion, because our museum is built around a historic McKim, Mead, and White mansion from 1901 that has been added on to over the years. So it's kind of this really diverse architectural space with modern gallery spaces adjoining historic mansion, like very nice 2-season, 3-season house rooms with crown molding.
What does that mean? 2-season, 3-season. What does that mean?
Yeah, so they would just spend like the spring and fall out there. They wouldn't spend the winter there. They would just spend the nice months there as a family.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Got it. Okay.
So it really is, when we're looking at how to plan out our rotating exhibitions, which rotate typically twice a year, spring and fall. We uproot everything in our temporary exhibition spaces and put something new in. we're looking at what is going on in the museum as a whole. How do these exhibits speak to the collection that we already have, our permanent collection, and how do these exhibitions relate to one another? And what space do they make the most sense in? So the best example I can give you is what is on view right now at the museum. In our smaller mansion galleries, those historic rooms, we have an exhibition of Paul Stinkard's flame worked glass. He creates these amazing, they're just stunning, intimate, botanical little worlds. He started by making paperweights, and they've grown into these gorgeous orbs that just have this entire world built inside of them, all made out of glass. And so that really speaks to sort of our natural history collection, and it ties into like the history of the institution as like being a scientific institution. And when we were looking for an exhibition to kind of complement or support that exhibition, we looked to some really well-established New York artists, Neil Ginny and Donald Sultan, who work on a massive scale. So their work really fits nicely into our main gallery space, which is this cacophonous room with these 14-foot high modular walls that are in 4-foot panels. So it really fills in that space, but their work all focuses on kind of the human interaction with nature and how we as humans interpret the natural world we live in, whether that is sort of realistically or imagined, and just sort of the artifice of nature and anytime humans have to kind of represent nature. So they're wildly different in the way they go about their craft, but they relate to one another in really beautiful ways, so that when our visitors are coming to the museum, they're getting a holistic experience. It's not, like you said, just these disparate little pockets of different things that are happening. We think holistically on how am I, if I were a visitor coming to this museum, how would I interact with this space? How would I look at these exhibitions and leave thinking, oh, this museum makes sense? Or I don't want anyone to ever come to our museum and say, what did I just see? That's not the goal.
Right.
And we do, for every exhibition we design, every exhibit is different. So our job as curators and exhibition designers is to create a framework, a foundation upon which to exhibit the art. And every art and every style or function, whether it's 2-dimensional, 3-dimensional, how much the artist wants to be involved, all of that really plays into this. But my job as a curator is to look at the art and figure out the best way to display this art so that it is a really immersive experience, so that when visitors come into the space, it feels different than the last exhibition they were in. And so that it is serving as a really strong backdrop to the art. The space should never be the first thing you notice. It should always be the art itself. But the space should be a really good experience. Like when you walk into a space, it should feel like it makes sense for the art that's exhibited in that space. So for Paul Stinkard's show, we painted the room really dark. It's this really beautiful, dark color. And then it has wallpaper that's a floral wallpaper on one end of the wall that really speaks to his artistry. Because his works are so small, the intention is to draw your view away from the walls and to focus just on those jewel-like objects. Mm-hmm. Now, in the case of the Donald Sultan Neil Ginny exhibition, it is a wide open space, and their work is really rich and colorful and textural. So it calls for like a lighter backdrop where the art can really shine, a more neutral sort of backing. So we painted that entire gallery this beautiful soft gray. So it's not the stark white that it feels institutional, but it's a really good neutral background for which this really bright, monumentally sized artwork to really like shine.
It It sounds like storytelling in a way, but I feel like that's not maybe the right word
No,
exactly.
it's absolutely, it's visual
Okay.
storytelling. So if
Okay.
I, a visitor, walk into a gallery space and do not know what that exhibition is about within the first minute of walking in, then the museum has failed. So
Okay.
visually, we have to present an exhibition in a way that visitors walk in, and if they don't read a single thing in that
hmm
exhibition, they will leave knowing what that exhibit was about. So it's
And is there like a narrative arc to, like, do you intend, how often do you intend people to follow a prescribed path through an exhibit versus just sort of wander around or walk in through the end and walk out the beginning? Like,
So one thing I learned very early on is visitors never follow a prescribed path.
okay.
So
hmm
when and I'm guilty of this too as a museum goer. Like I always accidentally walk through museum exhibits backwards somehow. Even as a curator, I still do it. So when we're planning out this visual story, it really has to be done so that you can jump in from anywhere. And
Non-linear.
yeah, so it's
Yeah.
nonlinear, especially if it's a sculptural show because there's a winding path around the objects. They're three-dimensional. They're meant to be seen from all three sides.
hmm
So, two-dimensional objects, like even that, you are they going to go clockwise or are they going to go counterclockwise? You just can't
Right.
anticipate that. And even it should, like, you put arrows on the floor to guide people, they're still going to walk whatever way
Right.
feels right to them. And so
Yeah.
our job is to create kind of a visual storytelling experience that no matter where you drop into the story, you're going to be able to get something from it, and all of it's going to make
Mhm.
sense by the time you leave.
Speaking of immersion, um, the first time I experienced something that really felt immersive in a museum was at the Art Institute of Chicago. I turned a corner and saw Paris Street Rainy Day, which I'll have to link to for those who aren't familiar with it. And the two things that struck me about it were the size. I had no idea how big it was. It's life size. And so the people in it are your size. Um, and the way that it was hung, if I remember correctly, it wasn't on a full wall, but it was in a movable wall in the middle of a space with some other things going on around it. So it was sort of in a, there was maybe 2 or 3 feet of blank space on either side, but you could walk around it to see everything else in the exhibit. But there was something about the fact that it was hung in that way and not against like a, I don't know the terminology, but like sort of a terminal wall, like where you're just like
Yeah.
at a wall and there's you can't walk around it and there's no other space around it and you're just sort of there. Made it feel like you were in the street, that the blank space on the left and right almost was a stand-in for where the buildings would have been if the buildings had continued out of the painting and towards you. And it really felt like firm, and there's they got the lighting just right so that it was a little moody because it is a cloudy, rainy day in Paris. Um, and it was the first time that I actually had the experience of like feeling like this painting was intended to be stepped into, and they actually the space facilitated that. And
Yeah.
it had never really occurred to me before that these two things, like the experience of that artwork would be very different if it were on a wall with two other pieces of art flanking it, and then walls on either side that then would lead me counter or clockwise out of the room, right?
Yeah.
Obviously that was very intentionally done. Like there's
Yes.
no way that they just sort of happy accident they put it on this space, right? But that kind of thoughtfulness, it had never really occurred to me that museum design and experience design within a museum would have to take into account things like that, as opposed to just like, let's just make sure we can get everything slapped up on a wall, which is kind of how the Louvre feels, right? They have just such an embarrassment of riches that
Yeah.
there are whole hallways where they cover every inch in some kind of piece of art because they just want to overwhelm you with what's happening.
Yeah. Yeah. So, one of the things I think that is really wonderful about these sort of like temporary exhibitions and rotating exhibitions is we don't have the same problem as the Louvre, where they have this massive, amazing wealth of, like you said, riches at their disposal and they want to display it all. For us, we get to be very thoughtful about how we're presenting art and how our visitors are going to interact with that art so that we can create experiences, like you said, where it feels very natural. Like it seems like there's no other place that painting should have been. You
Hmm.
know what I mean? Like that was the
Yep.
perfect placement for that painting for you as a visitor to experience it. And that's something that we think about a lot in exhibition design. I sit down with our exhibits team and we really thoughtfully plan out where everything's going to go before we get into the gallery. And more times than not, once we're actually in the space with the actual objects, it changes. Just because the
Sure.
way we interact with objects in person is very different than kind of the construct on paper and what that design on paper may look like, and it may be perfect on paper. In actuality, it just doesn't function as well, and it doesn't create that sort of experience for visitors. We want people to kind of get lost in the space and feel like they're in an environment, whether that's pop art and it's really bright colors and it's jazzy and it's fun, or it's like Paul Stinkard or Donald Sultan and Neil Jenny's work, where it's this really immersive, natural environment where you can feel yourself inside those works of art. And and a lot of what we do really does revolve around visitor experience, and that goes as far as to thinking about, light levels, sound, volume of different, like if there is some digital asset in the exhibition, a film that's playing or whatever that may be, what is the appropriate volume for that to play at?
Or
Is
if there
there
are
ADA?
headsets available because it's intended to be very personal,
Yeah,
right? Or kind of private in a way, or you don't want any sound to leak out, right?
exactly. And,
Hmm.
and ADA clearance, can people with mobility issues really navigate a space easily? Because we want every visitor to come to our museum and feel like they belong,
Yeah.
regardless of what their life experience is, what their background is, whatever it may be. Everyone belongs in the museum. And so,
Hmm.
as a curator, and when I'm designing exhibitions with our exhibition staff, that's stuff that we all talk about. So, we think about if somebody has a sensory or auditory issue, like are we posting enough signage so that people know what to experience going in? So like
Right.
Federico Solmi's exhibition was kind of cacophonous. It was loud, it had a lot of flashing lights, and it was really created this kind of insane energy in that exhibition
Hmm.
space that was amazing. It was perfect for his art. But if someone with an auditory processing issue came into the institution, it could potentially be too much. And so one of the
Right.
things that we're very cognizant of is making sure that all of our visitors know what's happening at the museum. And if there are sensory and auditory kind of warnings, heads up, this is a really loud exhibition. If loud noises are an issue, then we have ways to navigate that. So we're even in our programming, we're trying to intentionally plan for art museum programming around those considerations. Like our exhibitions and collections assistant Emily has designed an entire touch tour for our Guinness collection for
Hmm.
people with vision impairment,
Hmm.
so that people can come in and feel the mechanical musical instruments and automata. So these are all like considerations from all the way from exhibition design to our programming that we weave into what we're doing at the museum.
You mentioned the touch. Uh, the first time I'd seen well, the first time I'd seen two-dimensional art rendered three-dimensionally for touch was at the Peggy Guggenheim collection in Venice, and I assume it was pieces of their permanent collection because it must have been. I mean, they had to commission a three-dimensional representation of this art, but um, it was fairly modern geometric uh, uh, style art, But in to help people sort of visualize what this looked like, um, for somebody who could see it, um, in front of or beside the framed piece of art on the wall, there was something that was mounted or kind of stuck out a little bit on a ledge that was a representation of that two-dimensional art in relief, so that somebody could feel the shapes of it. But there was also this level of interpretation that needed to happen, and I have no idea if the original artist was involved in this or if this was sort of a, an extra or posthumous reinterpretation of the art. But it must be such an interesting. I mean, that is art itself, because a sculpture has been made from a two-dimensional piece of art, but you have to interpret it, and you have to interpret it both on the one hand with the original intent of the artist in mind, but then on the other hand making sure that it is still engaging and is meaningful and useful to people who are engaging with the art in a tactile way as opposed to visual. I have no idea who does that in the world. That must be a fascinating job or a fascinating challenge. But I mean, I assume that would be an example of some of the things that you're thinking about, where you're trying to create art
Yeah,
that is accessible
exactly.
to everybody.
Exactly. So, something that, was said to me in graduate school that has really stuck with me is museums are for all. And museums have a history of being known as kind of elitist organizations for
Mm.
the erudite,
Hmm.
the intellectuals, that sort of thing, affluent people. And that's just not the case in the modern museum world. We as museum professionals, the thing that we work really hard towards is inclusivity, and that includes across the spectrum, whether that's representing more voices in the exhibitions, um, things like the ADA accessibility, touch tours, sensory warnings on our exhibitions where they apply for flashing lights or loud noises. All of that stuff plays into creating a space where everyone feels welcome. And that is my, I guess, like my personal ethos that I live by, is I want anyone from an elementary school student to someone who has a PhD in art history to come into the institution and feel like they've had a good experience. And that's an interesting challenge as a curator, to kind of be able to navigate and figure out
Yeah.
how to serve all of those demographics.
Well, you started to touch on something that I wanted to bring up, so we may as well segue into it, which is how have stakeholder, which includes visitors and board members and donors and everybody, how have stakeholder expectations changed over the course of your career, whether it's in the actual exhibit themselves or maybe the business behind it or the selection methods or whatever?
To be fair, I've only been doing this for a few years. I kind of came into this later in life. I
Hmm.
did life a little backwards. But in the brief time I have been working in the industry, I started kind of in the heat of the pandemic and have
Oh,
been,
wow. Okay.
yeah. So when I say I'm new, I'm new.
Yeah. Well, also,
um,
what an interesting time to start to experience that change, right?
yes. So
Hmm.
I think that one of the things that I've seen really impact the museum world since 2020 is really a focus on what is happening in our world currently, whether that's social issues, whether that's rights violations, what's happening kind of with technologies, all of that, all of how our world is rapidly changing is becoming more and more present within institutions. So you don't want to do something just because it's popular or just because it's the hot button item. You want to do it in an intentional way so that it is building towards something, whether that is serving a cross section of your community that you weren't serving before, or whether that's creating programming to serve a demographic that has been affected by some kind of change that's happening in the world. Institutions have to plan intentionally to do those things. So it's not lip service. And I think that that's a really difficult challenge for museums to be able to do that, instead of like just saying having an exhibition and that being the end of it. Like having an exhibition, building those community relationships that support that exhibition, whatever it may be, and then building off of that some future programming that's going to serve whatever cross segment of the demographic of your community that you're trying to reach to with this exhibition. Mm-hmm. A really good example for us as an institution is we have had a partnership with Art in the Atrium Incorporated, which is a Black arts and artistry organization in Morristown, New Jersey, that has been doing, like, putting up, mounting exhibitions for over 30 years. So they have this history of supporting Black artists as they're up and coming, and creating a grant system to support up and coming artists so that they have the financial backing to kind of work towards their craft. Or, having exhibitions that promote Black art and artistry. So the Morris Museum has partnered with them as a community organization to really intentionally help what they're doing, give them an extra platform to do what they're doing, some more space to do what the amazing work that they have been doing for over 30 years, and to really keep that community relationship strong, because they are our local neighbors in Morristown, New Jersey. They are working their amazing magic in Morristown, New Jersey, and we saw an opportunity as an institution to really be strong partners with them and to create a space where we are both supporting the work they're doing and just being a good neighbor to them. And that includes having their curators come in to be guest curators on the exhibitions they are mounting at our museum. And I end up being the exhibition manager, more or less, for those exhibits. And I just make sure like everything stays on track, but it's told through a different perspective. Those exhibitions are never told through my voice. They're told through a different experience, a different sort of voice. And it makes the most sense because I, as a white female curator, don't have the same life experience as the Black artists that are being represented by Art in the Atrium. So their curators from the organization come in and they work with me to create a museum exhibition that's told from their point of view, from their voice. And I get to facilitate, which is just one of my favorite parts of my job, is working with them. So, so that is an example of museums intentionally building partnerships to get other voices into what has traditionally been a very like elitist, colonialistic sort of institutional paradigm, and to shift that paradigm to towards the future so that more voices are represented in museum exhibitions and there are more viewpoints represented in museum exhibitions.
That's also a great segue into one of the last things I wanted to cover, which is what do you feel is the future of exhibition design? I had originally sort of thought of this question in terms of, emerging technologies and visitor expectations and things like that. But of course, you've touched on representation and how that is a part of the future of exhibition design. What else do you see happening in the next 5 or 10 years? How do you think expectations about exhibitions and maybe the Morris Museum in particular is evolving?
Yeah, so the Morris Museum is kind of on a growth trajectory right now, and I think I can speak more to my particular ecosphere than broad strokes museum industry, because every museum is so wildly different. For us, we are kind of on this growth trajectory. So we are being really intentional about creating museum programming. We're being intentional about our exhibition offerings, how our exhibits are going to line up on the calendar to create a holistic experience, and how those exhibitions are going to support the community that we belong to, that we serve. Because we have a local demographic that is our immediate stakeholders of people that live in our surrounding community and the surrounding counties around our community. So those are like the foundational elements of what I think the future of the museum world is going to look like, is really paying attention to those key points of who's coming to the museum, what do visitors even want, making sure you have the visitor data, both like quantitative and qualitative, in order to build a framework that is going to push your institution to be a really intentionally serving the community sort of institution. Figuring out what has worked in the past and what hasn't, so that you can take that information and apply it to the future. In terms of what visitors are expecting, I think more and more with these super immersive, like the Van Gogh experience or those sort of like immersive technology exhibitions, I think that visitors are looking for really impactful exhibitions. And that doesn't have to be like the Van Gogh experience. It can be a very simple, straightforward exhibition, but it has to be done intentionally, and it has to be done with thought of how visitors are interacting with spaces. You have to watch how visitors navigate spaces. You have to watch how much time is a visitor spending in a gallery during a certain exhibition. Why are they only spending 5 minutes in there? What about the space is not working for them? And taking all of that information and transforming it into a plan for the future. That was really rambling. I'm sorry.
No, that's I think that's fascinating. It's interesting that you mentioned the Van Gogh experience. I'm kicking myself because I was in New Orleans for a conference last week, and the timing did not work out. The Van Gogh experience was literally across the street from where I was staying, and I could not figure out a time to go. But it was for those who aren't familiar, it's a multi-walled immersive experience where you sort of enter the painting and I hope I'm getting this right, expressionist style of Van Gogh. I hope I'm getting that right. And if I remember correctly, there are like lounge chairs in this space where you can kind of like lay back and look up at the ceiling and all the walls, and you're sort of, in Starry Night, and you're in these spaces as they animate and sort of breathe and grow and all of that. It looks beautiful and fascinating, but what an interesting way to take the style and the brand of Van Gogh and turn it into, kind of modernize it in a way that brings it to life in an interesting space.
And I think that my favorite thing about those exhibitions in particular is I kind of view them as like a gateway to art museums, because they're accessible, I think, in a way that museums kind of come off as being scary places to enter sometimes. And I think that having these sort of immersive experiences where people are able to interact with art is going to create a space where people feel like, oh, maybe art is for me. Maybe I should go to this museum and see the actual painting in person. And so I think that the thing that I like about those is they are accessible ways to view art, and it's intriguing to a wide variety of people, and it makes a lot of people want to kind of go and experience it, because it really is like, oh, I went to the Van Gogh experience kind of thing,
Yes.
So
yeah.
But it is a way for people to interact with art in a new way, and kind of bridge a gap that I think does exist still today between just the wide world and in in other institutions, cultural institutions like museums.
One of the themes that's come up a few times in our conversation, you've hit on it again right here, is the need to change the potential perception of museums as a sort of pretentious, intellectual, well, you shouldn't even walk in here unless you get it. Whatever that means, kind of experience, to No, let's actually make it very easy to want to come in and take whatever it is you're going to take away from this experience. Um, but embracing things like a reinterpretation of Van Gogh in a, let's face it, fairly Instagram friendly, I hate to say things like, shorter attention span, but like, it's animated, right? It's sort of like you can't help but stare, and that's the point. That doesn't replace the experience of going somewhere to see a Van Gogh painting, but actually encourages people to seek that out. That it's a gateway into, and not some kind of like millennial Gen Z replacement of art, which I think is a really great attitude to have, and really I think highlights where a lot of this stuff might be headed, which is pretty interesting.
I think of it in terms of like support programming for Van Gogh's artwork. It's reaching a wider audience to kind of have more people experience his art in a way that he probably, there's no way he could have dreamed of the Van Gogh experience in his lifetime. No. But it really does support kind of the narrative of his artwork. And it's done in a way that, like I said, it's accessible. It's not a quiet institution where you walk in and everyone's whispering. It's a kind of raucous, you're in the middle of the painting, you are part of his artwork. And I think it's a really great way to use those modern technologies in a way that kind of translates art into an accessible format. And I don't think it would work on every artist artwork. And I don't think it, like you said, it's not a replacement for the original, because the originals are so stunning and moving and textural, and you lose the texture of his paintings in the Van Gogh experience. You aren't getting that, like his encaustic paint where it's layers upon layers of paint that you see when you're in person. But those sort of technologies used as a way to, like I say, bridge that divide and get more people interested in art, get more people interested in, oh, I now want to go to a museum to see X, Y, or Z because this really led to that. I think any way that we as museums can make art or cultural history or whatever it is we're doing as an institution more accessible to a wider, broader audience, the better. Like we need to be intentional about making those bridges, building those bridges, and creating avenues for different subsets of our communities to access our institutions. And that includes programming for different subsets of age groups. That includes creating tours for family groups. That includes creating those sort of like tours that people with art history degrees want to come to, because museums are for all. We want to serve everyone in our community.
Beautifully put. And Michelle, thank you so much for just a fantastic conversation. If people want to learn more about you or more about the Morris Museum, where can they do that?
Yeah, so morrismuseum.org, MORRIS museum.org. You can find out more about what we're doing there and what exhibitions are on our website. We also have a live theater there, which is amazing. There's great programming offered in our theater as well. So just go to our website.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you.